Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well. And this is the monthly Why You Know Review segment where I go over a series of records that I didn't get a chance to do a long-form formal review of over the past month, so I am talking about them in brief, gauntlet style here. All of the albums I am talking about in this video are listed down there in the description box, and without any further ado, the Why You Know Review. Why isn't this album out in the US? Why isn't this album out in the US? Why isn't this album out in the US? Why isn't this album out in the One of the worst things I've ever heard. Do you need me to say anything else? Is he laughing? Is he laughing at how not good this sounds? This sounds like auto-tuned drunken karaoke. I mean, generally the vocals all over the album are pretty awful. Instrumentals, kind of uninspired. I don't get this. Wood is pretty fun. I will never listen to this again. Okay, am I a fan of this thing? Not really. However, I will say this is the first release I've heard from Avey where he kind of sidesteps this criticism that I've had for his work in the past, where his stuff just kind of sounds like an Animal Collective album sans the other members of Animal Collective. This is the first release where he's really just like stepping beyond expectations and coming together with a really strange, freaky, and experimental folk album that is totally out there. And I admire the bold and very strange risks he takes on this record. I feel like it's a little too whacked out and indulgent for me to really get into. Like, it's about as strange as like a Coco Rosie album at some points. Maybe not quite as strange, but it's certainly bordering on that. And for people who are into that more challenging side of the abstract folk spectrum, then please do not let this album slip by you, because there are some people who may be in that camp, because that's not typically what Animal Collective is known for, at least not these days. A lot of their older stuff was freakier and folkier, but definitely give this Avey album a shot if anything I've described here sort of tickles your fancy, because he's definitely doing something bold here. Does it really mean or anything or speak to me significantly? Not really, but still, this thing was definitely a surprise. I mean, I'm more interested in the new Juicy J album than I am this mixtape, and to be honest, it does kind of get old after a while. It's super depraved, and it's very dumbed down, and there are some terrible features on this thing, but when this tape is good, it's fucking amazing. And man, the Suicide Boys production on this thing is awesome. So if you're looking for just a druggy, crazy, totally off the wall, I don't give a fuck if I OD trap mixtape, then please give this a listen. Now, this is the Cormorant that I enjoyed hearing back when they dropped their Dwellings record so many years ago. I mean, if you're unfamiliar with these guys, they are a powerful, a progressive metal outfit that fuses into their sound elements of some black metal, some death metal. Like, it's a lot of different styles and influences, but they blend it together pretty nicely, pretty seamlessly into these really powerful, epic, heavy songs. On one of their previous records, Earth Driver, I thought the production was a little rough around the edges, kind of made the record feel so much more underwhelming than I wanted it to be, but it seems like they're going back into a much more epic direction with a slightly better sound on this new album over here. I'm not going to say that it's them, breaking new ground for their sound or anything like that, but if you've loved everything the band has done up until this point, you will most likely enjoy this. And if you are a progressive metal fan who's looking for a band that does it DIY, a band that's underground, doing their own thing, marching to the beat of their own drum, you got to give this thing a shot. You got to listen to this record, for the love of friggin' God. If this band wasn't speaking to me already in the late 2000s, It's not going to start now. I don't know, this is just kind of one of those late era albums from a band where a lot of those original fundamental characteristics that made a group great are still kind of there, but there's just that extra something that is just kind of missing. You know, certainly the duo is not as eccentric and as inventive and as over the top or really as fun as they used to be, but, you know, it's still a pretty good time. I was so excited and hyped for this dude when I heard some of the, you know, preliminary tracks and snippets leading up to this album, because the music sounded really beautiful, sounded really pretty. And it's kind of interesting to hear an artist who brings together elements of R&B and soul, but clearly, like, he loves himself some Radiohead, like, he loves some Dirty Projectors too. Like, you could hear those tonalities in his chord progressions, in his vocalizations. It's like the perfect crossway between the worlds of R&B and indie. And, I don't know, once I actually was able to see the full view of these songs, I feel like some of the tracks on this thing are more bells and whistles and more just pretty sounds than they are just like compelling and fully realized songs. Like, there are a few tracks on here certainly that are structured very well, written very well, Quarrel probably being the best of all of them, but there are just too many tracks on here that feel almost as if they're just a random array of like really pretty vocalizations and instrumental flourishes that don't really add up into a memorable tune. However, you know, with songs like Quarrel under Moses' belt, no reason that he can't write more mature songs moving forward. And who knows under what circumstances this album came out. Maybe it was rushed a little bit to get the whole thing together, and it is just a very short and straightforward 35 minutes. Maybe something a little more hefty and a little more ambitious and a little more fully realized is down the pipe, and once that happens, I think Moses will have the total package, because he has some great influences, great ideas, very strong, pretty sound, and hopefully in the future some really fantastic songs to back it up from front to back on a record. While I'm not in love with this Deerhoof album, it is one of the more unique albums in the band's discography for a few different reasons. For one, it brings on a number of different musical guests, including Martina Roberts and Letitia Seder of Stereolab fame, Xenia Rubinos, and that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. Aquafina as well, a guest rapper. And, I mean, it does bring a lot of personality, it does bring a lot of fun to the record. Certainly these guests enhance a lot of the tracks. Also, this record is a political statement from Deerhoof, as it were, believe it or not. And some of the tracks that do have a more political theme, like some of the covers on here, or the song about surviving in spite of the people in power who hate you, are actually incredible moments on the album, some of my favorite tracks on the entire thing. But also, it's easily one of the band's most indulgent records too, where you have multiple tracks here on a pretty short album. It's 39 minutes. It's not one of the longest in their catalog, that kind of indulge in these really weird instrumental detours, some tracks that are just a little too repetitive, one track that takes on like almost like an opera approach, which these weird and totally like unpredictable moments on the album, in my opinion at least, kind of muddy the political message that the band is trying to send on this album. Also, I think it kind of takes away from the moments where you have guest artists on here that kind of help the band create high points in the track listing here. You know, it's just that there's a good record in here, but there are a lot of weird detours and bells and whistles and diamonds in the rough kind of just tossed into the track listing really haphazardly. And I'm not exactly sure what the band felt these moments were adding to the album, because in my opinion, many of them just sort of take away. But, you know, some of their best material is on this thing. It's just kind of surrounded by some stuff that's a little distracting, I guess. I want to like this guy's music so much more than I do, and it's mostly because he has such an interesting cross-section of influences like Southern hip-hop and trap and just like really dark 3-6 Mafia type shit, but then he fuses that with like death metal and punk and industrial, and it's super dark, it's super distorted, it's super ugly, it's super edgy, it's really nasty. I mean, there are even some moments where it kind of reminds me of ICP, but not even necessarily in a bad way. But so many of the tracks on here are, and obviously there's a huge Bones influence on this thing too. So many of the tracks on this thing just feel kind of like these, I don't know, aimless messes that didn't really want to build into anything all that cohesive or fully fleshed out. Like some of these tracks are like weird detours or something. It's just kind of a tad inconsistent as a project, but damn if this dude doesn't have an incredible amount of potential with the sounds and ideas that he's pulling together. I've enjoyed Herbo's music ever since he started making noise with his Phasoland mixtape under the name Little Herb, and while he's had a few lackluster mixtapes released since then, I was kind of waiting for him to drop that one big commercial project that would kind of send him to the top, that would define his sound, define his style, and this just did not really deliver, in my opinion. I mean, there are a handful of tracks on here that go really hard, are thoughtful lyrically, like as far as these rappers that come from that drill and trap institution, Herb usually has like some pretty great and quality lyrics that kind of get to the root of the background that he comes from, you know, from a kind of societal or a social standpoint. But on this new record over here, not that I think it's all that lackluster lyrically, though there are some tracks where it feels like he really kind of dumbs it down to reach a wider audience. The issues that some people have had in the past with his flow, which can kind of be offbeat, it's so off on this album on some tracks that it's like, it's almost like he's parodying himself or something. I am not really sure what to say. You know, it's not entirely terrible, but it's spotty. It's spotty, and it's just not the massive, you know, kerplunk splash debut that I was hoping for. You know what? I mean, shout out to The Pains of Being Pure Heart on this record. This record is kind of a bounce back from their last album, which in my opinion was sort of underwhelming. This new one over here, it may not be the sound that the indie heads that loved them years ago may be familiar with, and it may not be the most original sound on the planet either. But it is a very quality pop rock and synth pop album with some very good hooks and some kind of rousing performances. So, I mean, it's a decent record. The crowned prince of Prague is back with an album that is so inoffensive you could play it in a doctor's office. I mean, I'm glad that Steven Wilson has kind of given up on merely trying to just trace over the progressive rock blueprint on this new album, but I mean, it's not like what he's given us in exchange here is all that exciting by comparison. I don't know. I mean, there are a few spots where maybe his songs are a bit hookier, or you know, some of the piano that appears on this record is very beautiful. But I still don't find him captivating as a songwriter, as a singer, and the instrumentals, in my opinion, leave a lot to be desired in the excitement department. It's just not for me. And everything that I have, you know, not enjoyed about Wilson's music in the past just continues to be confirmed again and again and again with every new release. So, I don't know. Primus are back, original lineup on this album. I was most likely just excited to hear that as you were. But while it sounds like a 90s Primus record, it just sounds like a 90s Primus record, but with no interesting songs and really boring performances. Like, if Primus sounded like this in the mid-90s, they never would have blew up. And considering that, I mean, I'm not really sure what else to say. It's just so painfully underwhelming. It's so drab. It's desaturated. This was a pretty interesting EP for Mastodon. Like, I'm not going to say I love it, but it certainly wasn't as hard to swallow and as annoying as their last album. It's kind of jumpy. They indulge in a lot of different rock and metal styles on this thing in a somewhat disjointed way, but I feel like that's kind of the intent and the point of the EP, for these songs to be multifaceted and sort of have multiple personalities going on at once. They were certainly well strung together and pretty well performed. I'm not sure I really like hearing Mastodon play it this smooth on some of these tracks, but it certainly came together pretty well, and I guess I would enjoy hearing the band go in this direction more than I would hear them like to continue what they were doing on their new albums. So I don't know. A W? Give this a W? Give it the win? Zishin, have you given these albums a listen? Did you love them? Did you hate them? What would you rate them? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry. Just leave an angry comment in the comments if you're angry. I'll see you guys in the next video. Over here next to my head is a playlist of YUNOREVIEWs, or you can hit up the link to subscribe to the channel. Cool. I'll see you guys in the next one. Forever.